Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, from wherever you are joining. Thank you so much for your time today and joining us on this webinar. It's going to be an interesting subject that we are going to discuss today. It's about achieving speed and quality in the age of fast banking. Our focus industry today is banking, but we would also cover financial institutions and to some extent insurance companies as well in this discussion. Uh, I'm your host, Deepak Parmar. I'm heading QMetry's marketing efforts globally, but at the same point in time, today I'm going to play a role of an inquisitive interviewer who want to know more about what's happening in the banking industry and how continuous testing is changing. How they deliver, much better user experience to their end consumers. I have a pleasure of having Harshal Vora with me. Harshal comes with more than 10 years experience in the QA domain. He has been on the technical side of QA and QE, and he's a product specialist at QMetry and has done a lot of work in this business vertical overall. Working with multiple banks, financial institutions, and insurance companies. So Harshal, welcome. Thank you for joining me on this conversation. Uh, I I gave a quick introduction of you. Can you elaborate more on your experience?
Sure. Thanks, Deepak, for the introduction. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for arranging this a very exhaustive session on a very good topic, right? How we achieve. But before that, let me just introduce myself. I work as a product specialist with QMetry and started out my journey in the space as a tester. And I have seen this whole digital transformation, and I feel sometimes that I have transformed digitally as well as a tester all the way to this product specialist role.
Uh-huh.
Delighted here to talk about this continuous testing and how financial institutions can leverage it.
Fantastic. So again, the topic is going to be continuous testing, and we are going to cover, how it is impacting banks overall. And it's going to be a very open conversation, my friends. So, a couple of housekeeping items at this point. It's going to be an open conversation. Anytime you have any questions, please put that questions in the Q&A panel. And if you when you have a comment, just comment over there, and we will try to answer your questions as we go in this conversation. I'll pick it up and ask Herschel, and I'm sure he will answer those questions. uh, and we will have a couple of surveys also during the course of this conversation. Please feel free to participate in them as well. uh, Again, friends, Herschel, as I mentioned, has worked with banks and insurance companies, so we will talk more in use case terms, so that you guys, everybody in the audience can connect some of the challenges that they are facing, or they would have envisaged, and how we have seen our customers finding a solution for those challenges, using continuous testing paradigm. Okay, so a few key items that we are going to cover today is seamless migration from legacy tools, because I think there are two types of organizations in the banking industry at this point. Banks with long lineages and legacy, but still with more fragmented tool sets and processes in place. And then you have digitally native banks, as well. So I think we'll talk more about that, how QMetry has helped some of these banks, specifically the banks who are legacy banks, or more traditional banks. We will also cover compliance, because compliance is a very big factor in the industry. So we will cover compliance issues as well, and how we can remediate those issues. We will also cover well, when we talk compliances, we also talk audit logs and version control and things like that, and we will cover that as well during this conversation. I think for decision makers, for project managers and QA directors and the likes, having the right information at the right time or actionable insight at the right time helps them to give a right take a right decision. So we will cover how analytics quality analytics can help decision makers. And then we will also talk about the fragmented environments which many banks are in at this point in terms of tool sets, and how we can integrate them and bring us more seamless experience to the QA teams, and basically help enhance the quality of the software and so the experience of the users, right? So Harshal, over to you. The first question for you at this point is, in the broader terms, for banks as well as other financial institutions, the quality, the continuous testing paradigm is delivering a better digital experience. What is your take on that?
Sure. I feel the continuous testing processes have always been there, right? It's just now it has gained a bigger traction or more attention because the way the end consumers interact with the applications, right, or the products that banks or financial institutions have to offer. If we talk about, say, 10 years ago from now, um, the end consumers would go online or go to the branch to know their what is my statement or what is my if they want to deposit a check, they want to withdraw money, they want to transfer money.
Mhm.
All those transactions were done through a branch or online. But now with the advancements in the technology where we have mobile phones or you have Alexa doing things for you, the whole interaction mechanism has evolved, right?
Mhm.
And it all becomes part of the consumer experience, where they need to get that consumer experience from their banking institution or financial institution. And for those banks, it has become important to deliver that experience to these end users in a continuous fashion. And that's where continuous testing comes into play, where you cannot wait for months or weeks
Mhm.
to deliver a feature or a bug fix to your end users, right?
Mhm.
Say if you have a bug in your, say, check deposit mechanism, as a consumer, I need to go to a branch or an ATM to deposit my check, right? Rather than me using mobile banking, and that is a big uh, no in consumer
For
experience.
sure, yeah. Mhm.
And that's where I feel the continuous testing processes enhances this whole mechanism of delivering the better consumer experience with a faster delivery of applications and shorter time to market, right?
Mhm.
And that's the whole paradigm of continuous testing changing the way banks processes the applications, and
Mhm.
that's driven by the consumer behavior,
Mhm.
right? And one of my good colleague or one of our customer, right, ABN AMRO CEO Francois, he says in today's day and age, products are not sold, products are bought, right?
Mhm.
And that's where the whole consumer experience comes into play, where based on the experience they buy the product. Everyone is giving a say same kind of products, but the decision making process is dependent on what kind of experience that institution is giving me.
Mhm.
And that's where the digital banking or fintech comes into play,
Mhm.
with the continuous testing processes underneath.
Mhm. Interesting. So, you definitely explained it with some good examples over there. So, I think my next question is on legacy versus digitally native banks,
Mhm.
right? You have legacy banks who are into this digital transformation process, and then you have banks who already are from a day one or day zero they are thinking digitally, or
Mhm.
they are delivering digitally.
Mhm.
So how would legacy or traditional banks, are playing in this arena now and competing, with the other digitally native banks, and at the same point in time, how we as a continuous testing paradigm people helping them, in their quest.
Sure, sure. And I would say this, right? These banks are playing a catch-up game, right?
Mhm.
If you look at, say, when you talk about digital native banks, then I would call Apple Pay and Google Pay or Samsung Pay. They are changing the way payment industry works,
Mhm.
right? The way digital has evolved, the banking industry, on the other hand, right, they're playing a catch-up game to match up with this digital or big tech companies, right?
Mhm.
Because this big tech getting into the payments industry and trying to innovate that space or
Mhm.
disrupt that space. So that's where and they have already implemented this processes, right? It's not just the continuous testing process, but it's the entire user experience and delivery process.
Mhm.
And continuous testing is an important piece of that process.
Mhm.
So legacy banks, they're trying to play a catch up by giving that end user experience,
Mhm.
adopting to this continuous testing processes by implementing the right tools, right processes, and right methodology, right? It's not just a people process technology play, but it's a methodology play as well.
Mhm.
It's not a PPT, right?
Mhm.
As I would like to play.
Mhm.
Uh, it's a methodology that needs to be implemented all across the board. Uh, and it comes when you put your customer first, right? The
Mhm.
customer centricity will drive this entire change,
Mhm.
whether it's a legacy bank catching up
Mhm.
or it's a digitally native bank trying to deliver that experience.
Mhm. So, and I'm sure it applies to all factors of, or all functionalities of bank in terms of payments, or that you mentioned, where in example of Apple Pay and Google Pay, or investment banking. If you take Robinhood, for example, as an as a as an
Yeah.
example, or you take any other examples today. You have a digitally native disruptor in the market,
Mhm.
changing the market for banks. So I think, let's go further and dive down deep, with your experience with ABN AMRO Bank. I think you that is one of the a big case where you work with a well-established European bank, a traditional bank who is into this digital transformation process. So can we dive down deep and know how did they go about it?
Sure, sure. So ABN AMRO Bank, right? I would say they are one of the advanced banks or early adopters of technology in terms of European banking,
Mhm.
right? Even in back in 2012, 2013, they had more mobile traffic than web traffic.
Mhm.
So their users were using their mobile application more than their web application. So they had to, because of that community, their users adopting to newer technology, they had to evolve faster in terms of adopting to newer generation tools and technologies. And um, they have their ideology is to serve the customer, right, in a fashion they want to be served,
Mhm.
rather than deliver the product what they have and have the customer just adopt to that, right?
Mhm.
So one of the biggest story that they did is in 2 years time they reduced their brick and mortar branches from about 500 plus to 170 plus. And
Mhm.
this is how, because they adopted to this whole concept of digital banking or online banking, where they use Skype technology to interact with their customers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So um, even for say mortgage banking or for their transaction banking, the consumers don't need to go to a bank to make a transaction. They don't need to go to an ATM to make any transaction, right? They can just go into their mobile app and dial a Skype call and interact with an ABN AMRO executive
Mm-hmm.
who can help them out over
Mm-hmm.
phone.
Mm-hmm.
And that executive can be anywhere. That executive can be working off of their home kitchen. They can be working off their home office. They don't need to be in a branch to deliver that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they have excelled. And when it comes to adopting to this digital experience, it becomes very uh, um, important to test this digital experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
You cannot roll out something and have your customers report those issues,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's where they have adopted this whole continuous testing life cycle. And it was rightly put through that this continuous testing is not just about digital assurance teams working, but it's an overall collaborative effort from the
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
organization that needs to be put in, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
not just the IT or technology team or just the business team
Mm-hmm.
responsible of delivering this. It's the collaboration of everyone that delivers this.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Very good. So, in their process, was tool the only consideration, or did they follow your theory of PPT?
Yes. So PPT theory is definitely what they started out with, right? That people process technology. But the first step was adopting to technology,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then people and process will fall in place.
Mm-hmm.
So their idea was to adopt to newer generation tools. They they migrated. Their strategy was from having everything in the bank rather than going to a cloud strategy,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the transformation you can see with the compliances and regulatory authorities behind them. They made a decision that we are going to go cloud,
Okay.
right? And that's a big decision
Mm-hmm.
for any public banking sector, right?
Mm-hmm.
That this and with all the vulnerabilities that can be out there, security compliances, they made a big change that they're going cloud and adopt to cloud tools rather than delving themselves with the legacy tools.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the biggest change.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say tool was the way, a segue for them,
Mm-hmm.
and to get into this whole digital transformation journey,
Mm-hmm.
right? So tool become a vehicle, processes becomes the um, fuel for that,
Mm-hmm.
and people being the driver of that vehicle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you look at it, right, the car is not going to function
Mm-hmm.
without any of this different segments,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they need a people, they need process and technology. But the first thing was we need to get into a newer vehicle
Mm-hmm.
rather than driving my old Camry. I need to go to a Tesla.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And that's how I see they made this decision 3 years ago that we are moving to the cloud to adopt to this newer generation tools and technology. We
Mm-hmm.
need to be agile. We need to be very DevOps oriented, or continuous testing processes needs to be implemented.
Mm-hmm.
For that, we need to have the right tools to get there.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So I think like you mentioned about tools, you mentioned about processes. The other part of your PPT is people, and you kind of mentioned about it. But I think I feel that when you're dealing with such a large organizations, the migration from existing not only just the tool set and environment, but also the mindset is very it's a difficult process when you have to migrate mindset of maybe hundreds or thousands of people towards more agile kind of a mindset. So keeping it in a smaller context at this particular customer that we are talking about, how did that happen? How people were motivated and migrated in terms of this continuous testing paradigm.
Sure. So again, this is a top-down approach, right? It has to come from the leadership team that this is the vision that we have.
Mhm.
We need to deliver on this vision. And the people transformation takes a phased approach, right? So, uh, being a large bank, they have about 200,000 employees, but they took a phased approach that let's have a group of technology users
Mhm.
get trained on these newer generation tools and technology, uh, where they can adopt to it
Mhm.
and give us that early feedback. So they started operating like a lean startup, right?
Mhm.
Where in a lean startup you try out few things, get a user feedback, adopt few things, get a user feedback, and then you basically you carve out a process by rolling out things in phases
Mhm.
and making those things better, right?
Okay.
So
Mhm.
that's as a large organization, they identified those technology users as part of that experimentation of rolling out the newer tools and technology. And
Mhm.
that's where the people, right? It's not just uh, creating those hackathon programs, creating those training programs for those users
Mhm.
is very important as well.
Mhm.
And I think one of the great idea they had was to create this hackathon,
Mhm.
which enabled this uh, adoption of newer tools
Mhm.
for the bank.
Okay, interesting. Harshal, this was really very helpful. I think you've really set up the context right, and we have a good platform to discuss further on this thing. Uh, so I love the concept that you talked about, in terms of PPT, because I think that's very important. Even if you talk about continuous testing or talk about any other transformation that one is going through, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
which is a very helpful thing. I think we have not touched in terms of details. In terms of the tools that were used or processes exactly how they were used, so we will talk about that further. But I'm sure one question that still kind of plays in my mind is how time consuming is this migration process for anybody,
Sure. So
and is it painful?
migration is always painful,
Mhm.
right? That's what I would like to believe. Even if you think of it, right? We are on the west coast of United States. If you have to migrate to East Coast, right?
Mhm.
It's going to be a painful process.
For sure.
Uh, and
A lot of steps.
Exactly, right?
Mhm.
So migration is always painful, and it takes time. It takes
Mhm.
time and effort. Um, as well as it costs money, right?
Mhm.
Now, the value that you get out of this migration is what needs to be seen, right?
Mhm.
Uh, and again, this migration can be a phased migration, right? You can choose to take baby steps
Mhm.
to get towards there, or you can just take a one big leap and get to that step earlier, right?
Mhm.
So, and the analogy I would like to put in here, right? If you're migrating from California to say New York, I can take a flight and just migrate,
Mhm.
or I have another approach of driving there and reach
Mhm.
there in 3 days
Mhm.
rather than reaching in few hours,
Mhm.
right? So, and again, both the approaches will cost you different amount of time and effort.
Mhm.
Uh, uh, and it's a painful process.
Mhm.
You'll have to go through that pain, but at the end, you're going to a better journey, or you're going through a better process to reach to a place where you can deliver better user experience, right?
Interesting. Mhm.
And this continuous testing, if you look at the waterfall processes that conventionally have been followed, uh, with this whole movement of agile and DevOps, continuous testing has evolved because of that. Continuous
Mhm.
testing was there in our waterfall processes as well,
Mhm.
but it was not nimble enough or agile enough to deliver the outcomes that are required in today's digital native age.
Mhm. Interesting. And one last thought that I have is there a timeline, or is there a right time to decide on this transition, or is it anytime you start you're good?
It's I think it's the later, right?
Mhm.
As soon as you realize that we need to deliver um, our applications or our products faster to market,
Mhm.
whatever it takes for that, we got to do that, right? So early you start, it's better for you. Later you start, you're always playing a catch up game,
Mhm.
right? So it's better to be early in the system rather than being late. So I would say, yeah, as soon as you can.
Interesting. Okay, so at that point, I'm launching my first survey question. Why do companies still wait till it's too late before they adopt the modern tools or processes? We have like around 20 seconds to answer them. Here you go. Okay, so I'm ending the poll now. We've got some interesting responses. I'm just ending it for now. Thank you for answering that poll. Let's go forward with that. So Harshal, I think interesting the discussion so far. We have a few other questions to discuss at this point. I'm also opening up the conversation for for our users to participate. They can ask. I mean, audiences can ask. You can ask your questions. I will take them up and ask Harshal. During the conversation itself. So please feel free to ask any questions that you would have in this uh, about the session that we covered so far, or anything in terms of software testing in general for banking as well. It's open, so you can ask those questions. So we have one question, Harshal. This
Mhm.
is from Josh. So he's saying, what are the core components of continuous testing according to you?
That's a very good question, right? So I think the testing, right, when we talk about continuous testing, it's all about shifting the quality left. And that's where I feel the testing does not start by a test case authoring phase. It starts all the way from the requirement definition phase, right? Whenever you are defining your user stories, wherever you are defining your uh, requirements for the product, that's where the testing process starts, right? And that's where the continuous testing, if I have to chart out a continuous testing process architecture, then I would start out at requirements definition phase
Mhm.
rather than the test definition phase, right?
Mhm.
Uh, so the requirements definition phase is the first step in the core or of this continuous testing process.
Mhm.
It will go back to the test, and that dives back into the test definition, um, how the test definition is done, analysis of those user stories,
Mhm.
and then you have your test automation, because that's a very important piece in your continuous testing, right?
Mhm.
You don't uh, achieve the continuous testing outcomes unless you get to test automation, right?
Mhm.
And test automation is one piece, right, of that. There can be test data management, which is automated. There is test orchestration that is automated. So there are multiple steps in that at time of test automation,
Mhm.
right? So
Mhm.
and once that is done, it's test analytics that comes into picture.
Mhm.
Now with AI and ML coming into picture, uh, this becomes a very important phase in continuous testing, where the test analytics is driven by AI and ML, and it
Mhm.
gives the feedback back into my user story definition,
Mhm.
right? And that completes our user continuous testing circle, where you have end-to-end coverage
Mhm.
from the user stories all the way to the root cause analysis, and feeding it back to the system,
Mhm.
right? Which enhances the entire process. And I think in conventional methodology, right, this feedback loop is the missing piece, right? Along with the automation um, piece, right? And when I have to say, if horizontally, if I have to uh, uh, digress or divide this particular process, then I would divide it into four different phases, right? Where you have, say, your build automation, where your engineering team is building out the application, right? You have your source control repositories, you have your uh, code repository tools, source code analysis tools, and that is where the build automation comes into play. Then comes the test automation, where you have your unit testing, your regression testing, your functional testing, uh, maybe some security and performance testing as well as part of it. And then is the deployment automation, right? And last but not least is the continuous monitoring, which provides that feedback loop into the initial phase. So that's the horizontal view of that continuous testing process. And both the views support each other hand in glove.
Sounds good. Sounds good. That's really an excellent answer, Harshal. I think you mentioned AI and ML, and I would I would like to dwell more onto it later in the conversation. How because I'm hearing a lot about AI ML playing a role in QA and QE. I want to understand how it would really play out, now and in future. Okay, so another question, and another very important topic that we should discuss today is about compliance challenges in this industry, specifically from application software application perspective, right? And I'm sure is as good as compliance challenges the business overall faces, because they're delivering everything through this different applications, be it mobile, be it web, right? And also there are a lot of integrations which happen with their legacy applications or other external applications, and I think that is also come under the purview of compliance. So according to you, what are those challenges, and how are they kind of covered by us, from continuous testing paradigm perspective?
No, and again, that compliance and regulatory is a very important part of what these financial institutions deliver, right? And it is very important that these checks are in place. So, being agile or going continuous testing does not mean that this compliances and regulations can be overlooked, right? So you need processes or tools which can include this compliance as part of the process itself, right? And that's where the tools have evolved as well, where they provide uh, unique features that can um, complement those compliance and eliminating the human interaction as part of it, where a legal or a compliance member will go and look at whether this is complying by the process that were defined or not, right? There are tools available which have, say, e-signature feature, which will enable the users to just authorize a test methodology or a test plan or a test automation for a particular feature, right? Uh, and that compliances fall in place at the end of the test execution, that these were the compliances that were used as part of it. Say you're using ISO 27001, or say it might be any kind of HIPAA compliance, or those e-signature functionality or say auditing functionality helps remaining in the compliance, still delivering that continuous testing, right? By eliminating that human interaction.
Okay, interesting. So I think, from compliance perspective, when we talk about, things like e-signature, we still remain open, to most of the industries which kind of need compliance, right? And while there is still a scope for developing further in terms of being very specific to banking compliances, whatever they may be at this point in time, because I think that's an evolving criteria. And like, for example, CFR Part 11 in healthcare, which is a very specific compliance that was defined by FDA, and a regulatory body, and people, companies do follow that compliance. I'm sure in banks also you would have seen, your customers and your accounts asking about that to you.
Yeah. And that's where the PCI compliance in the financial industry is very important, right? PCI compliance, where any kind of data is, and we have seen, right, uh, from the past vulnerabilities like Experian and Capital One
Yeah.
breaches, it has taken a big step back for the financial institutions. But with these compliances around e-signature and those functionalities have helped these institutions to not only solidify their testing processes, but also deliver the quality product in a confident manner.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, so continuing the compliance issue further, I mean, you answered it quite well, but there's also keeping the audit trails or managing the audit trails, and then also maintaining the version control and things like that. How do you think the tools can help with that requirement?
Oh yeah, and version control is very important. Whether it's your code or your test cases or your test automation scripts, uh, you need to maintain that version control, right? So I feel functionality around version control and audit logs is an important feature that any continuous testing tools need to provide. Whether it's source code repository tools like Bitbucket or GitHub. If you look at test management tools, like say QMetry itself, or there are a lot of other test management tools out there, right? Or even, for example, you look at project management tools like Jira, right? You need to have that version control in place uh, for users to identify as well as comply by the regulatory requirements.
Interesting. Okay, so I want to share something interesting on the screen. So I found this, very interesting joke. So what you are, Herschel? Are you an optimist, a pessimist, or you're a tester, or what are you?
Well, from personality perspective, I'm an optimist, and from professional perspective, I'm a tester, right? So I'll say I'm an optimist tester, where I see this glass is big, but it's still half full, and there are few things that can be added into the glass, even though the glass is big, right? So I always, I'm an optimist tester.
Okay, interesting. So I think it's a very important factor over here. While this is funny, but if you really look at it, scope, user stories, the user requirements. These are very key. These are key important factors for testers. To work on, and sometimes. In the agile environment, they find it I mean, they are overwhelmed with continuously changing user stories or requirements, and I think that's where this kind of plays out. So I'm opening up a quick survey. I wanted to know what role you guys play in your organization. So this is for audiences. uh, Again, we have 15 to 20 seconds to answer it, and then we will continue the conversation. Okay, going in 1, 2, 3, yeah. So, Harshal, back to our conversation. So, we talked about these different roles. We have kind of covered the execution, authoring part of it, or where actually the testers who really do the core work. But I think they need guidance. They need there are also decision makers, who need actionable insights, and to really take rightful actions, specifically the QA directors, QA managers, so from their perspective, how continuous testing benefits them or improves their life overall.
Sure, sure. And as I mentioned, right, there are different phases in this continuous testing, right? Uh, for testers, leads, it's all about test authoring and test automation, right?
Mm-hmm.
The test definition, user story definition, and test automation is what is very important for them. How efficiently they can organize those artifacts into the tool
Mm-hmm.
or integrate with a tool, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because those are in today's enterprise ecosystem, it's a fragmented ecosystem, right?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of tools.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and that's where you need, say, not only your testers, but there are product owners, there are engineers who are working on a particular feature or a product. They all need to collaborate, and that's an important piece of integration with different tools that they need to handle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to the directors or managers, it's all about analytics,
Mm-hmm.
right? They need a power or authority that can be from those actionable intelligence, right? They can just make a decision whether this release is a go or no go based on the uh, dashboards or analytics that the tool provides them. And that is dependent again on the data being created by their leads
Mm-hmm.
or engineers, right? So it's an end-to-end process that is governed by different aspects,
Mm-hmm.
right? And again, the PPT plays a big role in that.
Mm-hmm.
People need tools and technology to help them in making that informed decision.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I also hear these terms a lot in terms of, predictive and prescriptive QA, AI and ML playing a role in providing, actionable insights. What is your thinking on that? Have you seen in your in your day-to-day experience or routine experience, AI and ML playing a major role at this point, in specifically in predictive and prescriptive QA?
And I hear every customer asking for this, right?
Uh-huh.
So you are not the first one to ask me this question, but every customer has been that, do you have something that can aid me in creating my test plan
Mm-hmm.
or help me in evaluating whether this release is a uh, go or no go
Mm-hmm.
based on. And that's where this predictive and prescriptive analytics,
Mm-hmm.
along with cognitive authoring, right, come into place. If you look at it, if from one sprint to another sprint, there were some changes I'm going to make in my, say, help feature. If there was an easy way that a tool can tell me that based on the historical data and based on the changes, these are the test cases that need to be executed, or in an automation, if automation already exists, it selects the automation, executes those test cases, and gives me the results back. And based on the results, it tells me whether these health feature changes are ready to go or no,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the world we are talking about, right? That's where the whole continuous testing, that's the holy grail of continuous testing,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That we are eliminating any human interaction in this. A developer checks in the code for help feature, and the system analyzes everything, executes the test for help feature, reports the feature test back into the system, and makes a decision whether it's a go or no go.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel AI and ML will take us there,
Mm-hmm.
but we are 5 to 10 years early into that.
Oh, are you saying 5 to 10 years still? So yeah.
For the testing, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we are talking about development piece, it's already there. But
Mm-hmm.
for testing, we testers are always very skeptical, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and that skepticism
Uh-huh.
will prevent AI and ML to take over the entire continuous testing process,
Uh-huh.
at least 5 years.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm digressing a bit. I mean, maybe it's part of the topic as such, but we also hear, terms like, self-healing, scriptless automation. So there's a lot of automation in automation kind of concept that's playing around. So what do you think about that? And what's your opinion on that? How it is how the current tool sets are really playing in that ecosystem. Do they have this kind of features at the or do you think your customers are also asking for this kind of features?
Definitely, right? Because in automation, right, when you're talking about continuous testing, when you're rolling out new features, maintenance becomes a nightmare. Your automation will be working on the previous version of the application, but it might falter on the newer version. And that's where the tools and technologies where you have low code or no code and self-healing comes into picture, right? Or the model-based testing, if you look at it, comes into picture, that you create a model and based on that model it creates your whole test automation for you. And I feel uh, it becomes the tools, there are tools out there, like even say QMetry automation studio that we have has the self-healing or low code. You go through the different phases of it, and it's create automation for you. uh, and then when it comes to maintenance, the self-healing feature comes in very handy. And it's not just QMetry automation studio, but there are a few other tools that support the same functionality on different platforms. Yeah.
Interesting. Good. Okay, so we have covered a lot so far in our discussion. So we covered various tools on test automation, test management, CI/CD. We covered about compliances. We covered about the PPT. The processes, people, and technology combination, and how that plays out in this continuous testing paradigm. uh, I think one important factor that I wanted to cover, and I think it's very important for me to really understand for my customers or my audience over here, is that there is still a fragmentation of tools, that's playing around in different organizations who have been using different tools at different point in time, and it's created a collaboration of tool. Or at this point also, you need a different tool for CI/CD, you need a different tool set for test management or test automation, or performance testing or security testing. So it's pretty wide. And then you also have test data management, which is a very important factor, or security testing, or the test environment management as well, or is a big factor as such, right? So what do you think? Let's dwell more on that question, that how that can be answered, for delivering a seamless experience for the QE organization, or the software testing organizations, in the
Sure.
organization.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, no, and it's I think I touched upon it as well earlier, right? What testers or engineers are care about is integrating with different tools, right? Because in an enterprise ecosystem, there are multitude of tools that spread across different organizations or different groups. And in Agile, all those groups form a sprint team, right? Or agile team that deliver that outcome. So all the teams are working off their own tools, which calls for creating that integration, right? Or we are dealing with a chaos. So rather than not creating those integrations, continuous testing calls for having those integrations out of the box. Now, there are tools which have exposed their APIs. Using those APIs, you can create those integrations. And that open API architecture is the way to move forward, right? If you look at Google and Apple, they have their APIs exposed for their payments, for their end consumers or their merchants to utilize. And that's where the whole power of adoption of those tools becomes enormous, right? And that's where I feel this new generation continuous testing tools need to adopt to the same, right? Whether it's you look at Jira did the same thing. They exposed their APIs and created a whole platform or marketplace for end users to create their own functionalities using that particular platform. And similar has been done by Jenkins, which is an open source platform. And then the exposed APIs helped other community members to create those outcomes by creating the plugins, right?
Interesting.
And that's where the integration um, plays a big role.
Fantastic, Harshal. Okay, so couple of questions from the audience. I wanted to ask you. So, one question is about performance testing. We mentioned, I think somewhere we mentioned about performance testing. So, how continuous performance testing, is played out? Can you kind of give us an idea on that?
Sure. And the performance testing is, as I said, it's part of the test automation journey in the continuous testing piece. And there are tools out there, like say Neots, BlazeMeter, JMeter kind of tools, which allow you to integrate your performance testing as part of your CI/CD or DevOps pipeline, right? Uh, Now it becomes an important piece when you are rolling out those features for your millions of users, uh, and you need to create that traffic before you need to have that confidence before releasing that to the market. And performance testing and security testing in financial industry, right? If you look at it, the security scans, whether it's a dynamic scan, static scan, or doing a vulnerability scan, yeah, there are legal and compliance tools like white source, which identifies that what are the compliance issues that can be
Yeah.
out there, and those tools are very important, right? And they integrate in this continuous testing process using those APIs.
Very good. I think one more thing that I wanted to kind of touch base upon was, so you already talked about security, test data management. According to you, what role test data management and also test environment virtualization will play in this entire game?
Again, for me, as a QA team, I don't need to rely on my IT team to create the test data or test environment, right? So that's where the virtualization power comes into the play when we are talking about continuous testing, right? There is no dependency for the dev. That's why they call it dev test ops, right? So there is no operational dependency for dev or testing team, because they have test data management tools, they have test environment management tools, service virtualization tools available, which can help them in achieving this continuous testing process by just click of a button, right?
Interesting. Cool. So let's answer one more question, and so I wanted to kind of have your final opinion on this continuous testing paradigm playing in banking organizations. How it is. Can you summarize your overall experience in terms of challenges and the solutions for that? In a quick way.
Sure. As we mentioned, right, the challenge here is how quickly we can respond to the market demand or market need, right, or the customer demand. Uh, and to overcome those challenges, there are internal challenges that need to be overcome first, right, in terms of the processes and tools that are being used, and how quickly we can adapt to a newer tool uh, and processes, right? So that's the biggest challenge. And it's not a challenge that cannot be solved. There are organizations out there that have worked on it. They have made leaps and bounds changes to adapt to these newer processes and tools, whether it's adopting to Jira, Jenkins, in integration with QMetry, test management, automation tools. Uh, it has uh, given them benefits within, say, 12 to 18 months, where they have been able to roll out their applications faster to market. So I feel the challenge is there, but it's about how we tackle that challenge. Are you ready to tackle that challenge? And we discussed, right? If you don't tackle that challenge, you will fade away. You will fade away in the past, right? And
Strong words there.
uh, Apple and Googles of the world
Uh-huh.
are out there to get you. So, as a bank or a financial institution, whether you are offering insurance services or you are offering financial services, you need to be out there as a 401k contributor. I want to continuously monitor what's going on. And the easy way is to monitor on my mobile phone. I don't need to go on web, or I don't need to
Absolutely.
call my finance analyst for that, right? And that's where, even if you look at Fidelity, they have made changes in last 2 3 years where they have given all the information on the phone rather than you
Yeah.
going back and calling people.
Interesting. I think this was a very, very, informative and insightful conversation that we had, Harshal. Thank you so much for your time, Harshal, and audiences. Nothing can happen without you. So thank you for participating in this conversation. I think we have a long way to go in terms of implementing continuous testing paradigm into banking, but it's happening. It's already started, and I think the tool ecosystem specifically. I think if I talk about QMetry, we are evolving ourselves to drive this this continuous testing transformation or paradigm, and improving our tools to deliver it this thing over a period of time. We are investing a lot into AI, ML, R&D as well, and developing tools around that. So I think you would see a lot of us from the tool ecosystem coming to you with a lot of improved tools that will help in the continuous testing paradigm. Again, there is a very good guide that is available on QMetry's website that you can which is a continuous testing guide for banking industry. Please go there. You can find more information on QMetry's website, www.qmetry.com. You will also get a lot of other such webinars that will come up this year. We have a series of webinars planned. So it will be webinars, conversations, and we are also bringing in. So right now you spoke with Herschel. We are actually bringing in a lot of industry thought leaders into these conversations as we go ahead in this year. So again, thank you so much for your time. We have a couple of minutes to go. If you have any questions, we'll wait for you to ask us those questions, and we can quickly answer them, or you can email us those questions, and we will be happy to answer them post this session as well. Again, finally, this session will also be available in the recorded form on our website. You will get a mail soon, so that you can actually revisit the website, the conversation, and find the parts which are important for you, from that conversation, and use it in your day-to-day professional life. I hope it helps, and I hope it improves your quality outcomes. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks, Harshal.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, so no more questions. I'm closing the session now. Thank you again.